This is a lesson on an early intermediate technique routine for the classical guitar. It's part of a 6-part series. We've already done beginner technique routine and then a late beginner routine. Now we're doing the early intermediate routine for this video. And then we're going to do an intermediate routine, a late intermediate routine, and an early advanced routine. You can watch these videos for free, and if you have your books of your own, you can formulate your own technique routine by watching the video, but this all comes from my technique book, which is available as a PDF or a hard copy. There's a link for that underneath the video, but it's a 120-page book, and it has everything that you need for all these different technique routines. It has tons of exercises, like 100 open string exercises, Giuliani's 120 exercises, scales, arpeggios, slurs, stretch, just kind of all barre, harmonics, all sorts of scales and thirds and octaves, all sorts of stuff that you need for this. But like I said, if you have your own books, you can formulate your own technique routine. Just be careful that you have the right materials for the job and that you're not missing anything, and that you're staying organized in that regard. So I'll go through the exercises in the book and the exercises on my routine list so that you can learn about what kind of things an early intermediate student should be doing. But you can also watch the videos for the individual exercises. Like, all the videos are free for the book, so you can go to the book page and watch, the specific video on Giuliani Arpeggios or the specific video on scales and learn a whole bunch of things and then apply it to either my book or to your own books that you have. What I'll do is I'll kind of go through the exercises, but I'm not going to teach lessons on each one. For that, again, just check out the lesson videos. So once you get towards the early intermediate routine, you have to be thinking about intermediate repertoire. And so the meat and potatoes, like the main things that you want to be practicing, is scales, arpeggios, slurs, and barre or bars. That is the main diet. Now, there's a whole bunch of other exercises I'm going to talk about as well. But if you're covering your scales, then you've got some good melodic practice and, with both hands synchronizing together. If you're doing arpeggios, then you're working on right hand patterns over chords. That's really good practice, especially for the right hand. Slurs, or in guitar lingo, hammer-ons and pull-offs. They're an essential technique. They're going to come up a lot in intermediate repertoire, so you have to remember to consider that. You must be getting good at your slurs at this point. Barres are going to really start coming into play. So once you get into like the grade 3 to 5 repertoire, in RCM, for example, barre is going to come up a lot, and it's time to start practicing it on a daily basis and making sure you're improving it so that you're able to accomplish all the technique or all the repertoire that you're seeking to play. So this early intermediate routine, this would be for people that are, they're approaching like Lagrima by Torrega, and a number of like Carcassy, H number 7, like lots of like that intermediate style repertoire that people would play. So the approximate length would be about 20 minutes, of course, give or take, right? You have to focus on your weaknesses when you practice, so you could condense this down to 15 minutes very easily by eliminating some stuff and focusing on other materials. First thing I would practice, or the first thing on my list for early intermediates, is open string exercises. Now, I've listed my open string exercises number 1 to 96, and that's a lot of exercises. But the main thing is to give your right hand some solid practice on its own. I'm not going to go over all 96 exercises, but depending on where your weaknesses lie, you might want to just go into like exercise number 50, for example. These are open string arpeggios with a moving bass. And then there's all the combinations. So all those combinations are really important, give you an opportunity to really work on the right hand. In my book, one of the important things that happens is that I switch up the arpeggios, so you start with a different finger. So for example, starting with the I finger. Or starting with the M finger. Or starting with the A finger. You know, and of course there's 100 open string exercises in my book, so I go over lots of combinations. But the most important thing is making sure that you can start with either of the fingers and accent it and make it the prominent voice. This is really important to musical balance and just evening out your right hand technique in general. There's tons of other exercises. You probably also want to focus on the two-part exercises like number 72. Getting further practice alternating the fingers while throwing in a bass voice, and then it goes through all the combinations like MA. There's a lot of other exercises in my book like expansion and string spacing, which puts spacing in between different fingers to kind of practice expanding different parts of the right hand to make it open and flexible. But the idea is open string exercises to make sure all the fundamental techniques are ready. But the main arpeggios that you probably are going to be practicing as an intermediate are the Giuliani Arpeggios. And like I said, I have another video on how to practice these. So it goes over planting in the right hand, the ways in which you should practice arpeggios. But today we're just doing this overview of what you'll be doing. So the Giuliani Arpeggios, finally you start using the left hand in combination with the right hand. This is number 1, number 2, or number 3, or number 4. And of course, Giuliani has the 120 exercises, and those are all in my book. And I've recommended that you work on Giuliani exercises number 1 to 16 and number 81 to 88. The way that Giuliani orders them himself, maybe not the best for intermediate or early intermediate students. So I recommend, again, 1 to 16 and then 81 to 88. And that should give you some good arpeggio practice, a little bit of an opportunity to work things out. I have a video on how to practice Giuliani's 120 arpeggios. So go to the book link, the lesson for that is under there. That'll give you a lot of information, and you probably already have the Giuliani 120 exercises. So other things I recommend are alignment exercises. We've already gone over this in previous videos, but some basic alignment exercises would be really good for your left hand, give you an opportunity to just work on placement of each finger. And then there's some more like specific alignment exercises. At this level, you can start doing some more complicated ones like horizontal patterns. Etc., etc. Lots of different patterns in my book. Just like basic alignment exercises to really focus on your left hand, making sure you get it all together. You should be doing that as an early intermediate. Chromatic scales, of course, you do a basic chromatic scale. And then back down. But basic chromatic scales, just to make sure you understand how chromatic scales work on the guitar, but it's also a good exercise for this level. There's also some like variations on chromatic scales, so like different ways to play chromatic scales, so you can check that out. You should be playing lots of first position major and minor scales. In my book, I have this page where I go through this circle of fifths with major scales. So you start with C major, and then you go to G major, then D major, etc., etc. And it goes through all the different key signatures. So it's an opportunity for you to practice playing your scales in all the different key signatures without stopping. And if you get really good at it, you can go through all the keys in really like 2 minutes or something like that. So, but you can also, I label each scale in that exercise so that if you want to practice it as individual scales and just learn like just from C major to G major, for example, you can learn just the individual scales, or you can piece them all together and see how well you really know your key signatures if you can stream through all of them like it does in the exercise. And I also have the same exercise but in minor scales, melodic minor scales. One thing as an early intermediate that you should be doing is starting to play movable major scales. So like some of the basic patterns. And I recommend you just learn the 1 octave patterns for now. Just getting a 1 octave down, and then learning the various different places where 1 octave scales occur. Sometimes we learn like a lot of larger patterns, like 2 octave patterns, but we don't know what's going on. So learning each 1 octave pattern might teach you a little bit more clearly what the different 1 octave patterns look like. And then when you go to larger scales, like 2 octave scales or 3 octave scales, you'll notice it. You'll be like, oh, this pattern is made up of this one and this one. And if you practice them individually, piecing them together, you'll be like shifting into familiar territory. So learning all your 1 octave scales is a really great idea. I think you should most certainly do it. Another big thing is slurs. So in guitar lingo, this is hammer-ons and pull-offs. And we've already done some elementary exercises in the last video. And the book has some beginner exercises for slurs. So you can check out those lessons from the book. But once you're in the early intermediate stage, you should be jumping into some more difficult patterns, things like fixed fingers. So you fix some fingers down, for example, and practice slurs. That way you're really training your hand to be in a good position when you do your slurs. You should also be doing like ascending and descending closed slurs. And if you're like most people, like 3 and 4 might need some work. And also doing the descending versions. Or whatever finger combination, right? My book lays them all out. Most books do for slurs, right? That's a basic slur exercise that every book is going to have. My book has some additional ones, so some more fixed finger exercises. Probably for the early intermediate, you just want to stick to like getting those closed position slurs down and your open position ones as well, and just keeping it really small and tight, making sure you really have mastered some easy exercises, but open string and closed slurs, descending and ascending. The other thing, and this is kind of optional, but I would include it if I was an early intermediate, is some basic finger independence exercises. Now, we might have gone over this before, but some easy ones are like fixed fingers, where you just move one finger at a time. And some students have a hard time doing this. When they're moving one of these fingers, other fingers like lift off and do weird things. But you need finger independence to play music on an instrument. Each individual finger needs to be able to function on its own. And there's a whole bunch of exercises that are appropriate. I have a whole bunch down here. I also have some alignment ones as well. So students often have the pinky finger like outstretched or don't have this knuckle over. So this exercise, for example, and then it goes up to the next. But practicing alignment exercises that challenge your left hand position are a really great idea. It's a way of improving your left hand. If you just play the scales or you just play like just the basic stuff, you're not necessarily challenging your left hand technique. So with an exercise like that, people's hands are often like this and they have problems. So this exercise actually creates the opposite shape, and you're going to practice the opposite thing, practicing something that will actually make you improve. That's really important. Intermediates need to correct a lot of their beginner technique, things they learned when they were a beginner. They need to correct that stuff. So you could try some of those kinds of finger independence exercises. And there's a whole bunch. I have a bunch in my book. Some are much more complicated. Some also like really challenge your vertical stretch. Really getting those fingers to really work. So make sure you're doing some kind of like alignment and stretch exercises. And then finally, a barre exercise, or bars, or capo, as some people will call it. So at this stage, like I usually don't introduce barre until students at the early intermediate level. Sometimes I'll introduce it earlier, just like little half bars and stuff like that, if the student's piece needs it or if they're playing lots of chords. But in this case, there's a couple of exercises in this collection that will help you correct your barre. There's some like actual exercises that help you isolate problems by getting you to build up a sensitivity within the bar finger. There's also some like just playing with bars. You know, not just playing bars, but also playing other notes around the bar. Because that's often a problem. People learn to bar, but these fingers are all messed up over here. And then you go to play a piece and it's so difficult. You need to practice doing your barre, but then, you know, engaging the other fingers actively as you practice the bar. So there's a whole bunch of exercises like that. Also like just some chord exercises, because it's actually a really good idea to practice just bar chords. And with this kind of like Freddie Green style jazz, like on and off playing, that's one of the ways that I got good at bars, or I fixed my bar problem a little bit. It's just by doing lots of chords like that, kind of like lots of pressure release, so you don't build up tension in the hand. It's a really great way of just engaging with bars, but not getting your hand all sore, and it's kind of fun as well. So that's the kind of that's the list of exercises that I would recommend. If you're kind of overwhelmed and you're thinking, oh, this is way too much material, I think what you have to consider is focusing on your strengths and weaknesses. So a little bit of your strengths, but mainly tackling your weaknesses and making sure you're overcoming them. Another thing that I would say is that when you're short on time, you can leave certain things out, but you should always be doing your scales, your arpeggios, your slurs, and probably your barre, unless you feel like you really have it together. And then when you have extra time, do some finger independence, do some alignment, and do some stretch exercises. Fitting that into your practice session should really help develop your technique and get you ready for some repertoire. Now the next video is going to be on intermediate routine. That starts to get much more intense. We add thirds and sixths and octaves, we add rasguiados, we add harmonics, we add tremolo, we add a lot of things, pretty much all the guitar technique that is needed for traditional repertoire. Some people might think my intermediate routine is more on the advanced side, but that's why I made this early intermediate routine, is to kind of just cover like the basics of traditional repertoire and to get you there. And like I said, if this is all too overwhelming, pick up the book, and it should help you get a little organized.